latest and greatest like gizmos and gadgets.
The
like,
hipster.
One of those two showed me like Alfred back when no one knew what Alfred was.
All right, you ready to do this?
Back in the old good cahoots days.
Get you a little intro, and then do this.
Sounds good.
All right, guys, welcome. So it's been a while since I've done anything in React around that, so I'm excited to have Brad kind of talk about React Router. And one thing that Brad doesn't even know is that Michael Jackson is actually going to be here in September to do. Oh, did you? Well, never mind. Then Brad did know. Apparently, I told Brad and forgot I told Brad.
You told everyone on Slack.
Damn it! Did I really? That's a bold move. Well, apparently, I told everyone on Slack that. I don't sleep enough. But Michael Jackson is going to be here to kind of talk about React Router in September. He'll probably present at Tyler's meetup. That's usually the deal that we work out, is do something community, and we will welcome you here. So that's something to look forward to. Outside of that, welcome to Galvanize. If you haven't been here, this is what we do. We do a lot of different technology stuff, everything from DevOps to data science to front-end web stuff to anything else anyone comes up and says they really want to talk about, design, pretty much everything. So thank you for being here, and without further ado, I will turn it over to the master.
So are we recording now? Already?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay. Well, hey everyone. I'm glad we got a cool turnout. Looks like a bunch of React developers here. So I don't usually do more advanced talks. I wouldn't say this one is too advanced, but I don't know, there's something special about teaching absolute beginners the absolute beginner stuff. So I like doing those kinds of things all the time. But this is probably one of my more advanced talks I've done in a little while. So bear with me, and also it's going to be a lot of live coding. There's 5 or 6 slides, and they're just there for visual purpose. It's not even really like a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm Brad Westfall, and I've been doing React for just a couple years, like most of us, right? Few people have been doing React since before 2014, 2015. Joe Fleming did the first React talk in Arizona, to my knowledge, because that was like in 2013 or 2012 or something. It was like the first came out. It was like brand new at Desert Code Camp. So that was great, and that was my first exposure to React, and I didn't really understand any of it at the time. So anyways, this talk is about React Router and layouts. It's not even really a talk on the mechanics of React Router as much as it is more like the strategies once you already know what React Router is. So I might talk about some of the small mechanics, especially if you have questions about some things, but it's really about some of the strategies. I kind of did what I usually do, which is I kind of discovered my preferred strategy just by doing it wrong a bunch of times. And also I had 2 projects I was kind of working on simultaneously. One of them was for a client that I'm working for still, and another one was for Questionable, which is my app that I'm putting together. And so the demo project that we have is basically a neutered down version of Questionable's layout strategy. So you're basically getting a whole bunch of React code and CSS code that I wrote. And so yeah, that's what it is. Just real quick, I also want to start consulting more on like doing trainings and stuff about React and CSS. So I actually worked like pretty hard today putting up this website. I had a stale website for Easy Pixels for like 4 years. And so I just put up this new one. It's got all kinds of problems with responsiveness because I just kind of whipped it up real fast. But it looks pretty good in desktop mode. So that's me, Easy Pixels. This is the real Questionable. So let me just log in here real quick. Let's see, what is my password? So this is the real Questionable. It's basically a platform for creating test questions, multiple choice style test questions for assessing people's knowledge, and you get to write real code, kind of like CodePen style, real code in the questions and answers. So that's what it is. This is what it looks like, and then we've got our kind of, like I said, the neutered down version of it right here, which we'll be talking about. So why did that happen? That's weird. Oh, did I stop my thing? I think I did. That's why it happened. Sorry, 1 second. Let's see. Oops, that's not what I want to do. Hopefully the CSS will come back to us. Oh, I know what happened. I changed the name of something. Sorry about this. React. What is this called again? No. Gosh, it's like the worst time to like have like one of these things. What is going on here? A shortcut called npm please, which wipes out npm and redoes it. So we'll see what that does. There's a website called npm please, and all it does is give you this like alias. It's kind of smart ass. It's kind of funny. Okay, let's see if this will go. Let's do the slides to get started. So this is a pattern that we all use. Every website uses this pattern. It's where you have like two div tags. They don't have to be div tags, but two block level elements, one inside the other, and then you use margin auto to like center one of them, give it a width. I call the double container pattern. I call, when you use them stacked on top of each other, I call these panel websites. Like these are how like all websites are done these days, where you kind of have like these different like panels. GitHub is built this way, Questionable is built this way, lots and lots of websites are built this way. The reason why you would stack these on top of each other is because you want to have a different background color for this panel versus this panel might have a different background color or a graphic or something like that. So in Questionable, what I do is I have a layout. It's called authorized layout because it's the layout that you see when you're logged in. So it's the authorized one. You can't look at any pages in this particular layout if you're not logged in. So it's called the authorized layout. There's also the unauthorized layout, which is what the login page stuff looks like, or the forgot password, or reset password, or email validation, or verification, or whatever. So this one is called authorized layout. Inside that, there's a layout called app sub layout. So this is the one where, see how I have these two tabs here? So that would be like, for instance, let's see if this is running. Like the only thing I did between this working and not working right now is put it up on GitHub. So that was weird. Freaking Microsoft. Okay, so it looks like it's working again. Okay, so in Questionable, this is like the app layout. Like you're in the actual application. There's tests, there's questions, there's groups and marketplace. But there's also my account. And my account has like different stuff. And not for you guys, but for me, there's also admin. And admin allows me to see all different users and different accounts that have been created. So there's the application is kind of divided up into three main sections with three main sets of tabs. And so this is what I call the app sub layout versus the account sub layout versus the admin sub layout. Okay, and then one layer underneath that, this is called the section layout. This only exists just to split up the app sub layout or whatever into two sections, like using Flexbox and whatnot. So visualized a different way, and we're gonna come back to this after we see some code. So I think it's good to show this, show some code, come back to it, so you kind of really get a sense of how I built this. The way that React Router 4 works is not like any other router I've ever seen in programming. Not only because it's JSX, because obviously React Router 3 used JSX as well. But every router that we've ever conceived of, that I've ever seen in any back-end MVC system or any front-end system like Backbone or whatever, the router is like in one like centralized place. It's like a part of the MVC-R paradigm where there's the router, right? And you have all your routes and you define these rules, and the rules talk to like controllers or whatever you want. In React Router 4, they had this idea of, what if the router was kind of like embedded into the layout system itself. And effectively what that means is that the routes themselves are a lot more like if statements. And so here's here's the authorized layout that's going to, using a switch statement, is going to choose between the app sub layout and the account sub layout. So if we go to the code, this is the index file. This is like the very top of the application. I'll show you the stuff here. By the way, this comes with no unit tests, and also I do classic CSS. I don't have any of the CSS and JavaScript patterns going on here, so it's all class names. I'm not going to get in an argument with anyone about it. At least that's what I told myself. All right, so this is the app. You can see that I'm using Redux because we have the provider that is like the main thing. We have the router, which comes from React Router. You might be wondering why I'm getting my router locally. I guess I should probably explain something too. I'm using a trick so that I don't have to do stuff like that. It's a little Babel thing that allows me to, it'll search inside my source first for things before it searches in node modules. So if you want to check out how I did that in Babel, you can check it out. But that's not really the purpose of the talk. So when you see something like something that looks like a folder structure like utils router, that's literally going to my local utils folder right here. So I've got my own router, which is an abstraction of React Router's browser router. Okay, and I'll show you that in a minute. Then I've got this other abstraction layer called scroll to top. I'll explain that too. But bottom line is you get to this switch statement here, and we're basically saying, all right, so are you going to be in the account section, the admin section, or are you going to be in tests or questions or any of the other things? And I'm going to the authorized layout, and I'm using this special route called authorized route because those are the routes that you have to be authorized to be in. Authorized route, as you may know, does not come with React Router 4. It's also something that I designed. So all these things that I'm telling you about that I say I designed, I'm going to cover these things, but I'm trying to just kind of show you one thing real quick. So basically the difference between route and authorized route is an abstraction that basically just checks to see whether or not you're logged in before it lets you go to the subsequent component. Okay, so back to the if statement thing. The way that React Router 4 works, and this is like my very limited explanation I'm going to do on React Router 4, is these routes and the authorized route, they're almost like if statements. So if this is true, if we're at that path, we're going to load that component. That sounds a lot like an if statement to me. It's basically just a JSX if statement that listens to the path of the browser and does browser history and back and forth and all that kind of stuff. And then if you wrap it in a switch statement, which is optional, it will simply choose the first one that happens to match. Be careful with React Router 4 because this path doesn't just match auth, it matches auth and anything that is after auth. So it's kind of like, it's an inclusive, not an exclusive concept. Unless you do the exact prop like that, then it's exclusive. So if they go to anything that starts with auth, we're going to load the unauthorized layout. If they pretty much go to anything else, we're going to load the authorized layout. So if I pull up the authorized layout, this is that first layer that I was talking about, where you have, I mean, basically look at this. It's just a wrapper. I mean, this is like literal. This isn't even. This looks like it's abstract. This is pretty literal right here. It's a wrapper with a header. It's basically this. Okay, so it's a wrapper with a header. So let me show you in the code. It's literally. I didn't mean to leave my lightbox stuff in here. I think I was going to implement lightboxes for you guys. I just didn't have time. So let me just take that away so it doesn't confuse. Okay. So anyways, this is my div tag with a class of app. I mean, that's like the main div tag that wraps around everything. So that's like the first actual DOM that we've created, because the index does not create any DOM. It only says, hey, if you have this rule matches, go to this component. Okay, so here's the authorized layout. It brings in the primary header, and then it's got another switch route logical section. Okay, so it's like, if you do this, if you think about how this works from a React mechanical standpoint, when we're inside of anything like account or admin or test or whatever, the primary header is only going to mount one time with this strategy. That's kind of like the main point. If you have a strategy where switching routes mounts your components that are the same, or the visual parts that are the same from page to page to page, if they're remounting every single time, you have a logical, strategic error in how you're doing your nested layouts, because you shouldn't have that kind of situation. There might be network requests that happen every single time a component like this gets loaded, and you wouldn't want that to happen every single time they switch pages. So now that we're in this layer, again, it's just a div tag with the class name of app, and now that we don't need conditionally the lightbox class name, this can just look like this. Okay, so then I don't want to get a rule here. Okay, so like I said, it's literally this thing right here. So the next layer is this layer right here. Notice it's the two double container patterns stacked on top of it. And I needed to do two of them because if you look at the page, it's this white background one, and you can't really tell, but it's like a light gray background right here. So you need this pattern twice, and so let's take a look at the app sub layout. There it is. I have this component called panel. Panel basically just simply makes a wrapper div tag and then an inner div tag, and then it's very simple looking. If you go here to layout helpers, panel is basically just that right there. So very, very simple. I just made it so I didn't have to type that div tag like a lot. So I've got two panels here. They're wrapped in a fragment. In case you're unfamiliar with React fragments, this is it comes from React itself. Fragments are basically React nodes that don't render anything, because when you have a React component, you have to return one node as the primary node, and sometimes you don't want to return an arbitrary div tag or an arbitrary anything tag. So there are these things called fragments now, which came out in React somewhat recently, and they're pretty cool. Once they came out, I started using them all the time because I don't really need that extra div tag there. Plus, if I'm going to do like lobotomized owl selector for CSS to like separate the panels or anything like that, then you wouldn't want an arbitrary div tag to be in the way of that. So this is the layout that brings in the navigation. Like you can see here, it says tests and questions. And then once again, we have another switch statement down here. I'll explain how the error handling strategy works in a little bit too, if we have time. So I guess what I'm trying to show you is that if you're going to take anything away from this talk, you really start off with like a master layout that has a switch statement, has some DOM, just enough DOM for that master layout, and then a switch statement, which leads to another sub layout, which has some more DOM or React components that has another switch statement inside of that. So you kind of like use the layouts and these switch statements to like dig into the page that you want. So that's why I drew up this last one like this. It's like a switch statement leads to this, the question section layout, and then that leads to the ultimate page that you're on. So I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking and you guys are kind of like nodding your heads. Am I like going at an okay pace? You guys learning anything? You liking it, or do you totally hate my strategy? You guys okay? Okay. Anyone have extensive experience using React Router 4 in here? For a little while?
Yeah.
Does this kind of resemble like what you do a little bit?
Kind of.
Kind of?
I think we made some mistakes.
Okay. So is everyone else using like React Router 3? Like raise your hand if you're using React Router 3, if you know. What are you guys doing React? Yeah? So if you're using 3, are you using something else? Like what are you guys using? Go ahead and speak up. Oh, 4 for a couple days, okay. Anyone else? Joe, what do you guys do?
I wrote my own.
You wrote your own, okay. Anyone else, yeah? Okay. Yeah, I mean, the idea for me kind of came straight from the docs. Like they have like they show you how to take their route, and it's just a component. The route component is just a component, so you can abstract it, you can put another component around it, and conditionally decide if the route's gonna be there or not. And I believe they used authentication as their example, and I saw it and I was like, oh, okay, I can mold that into my personal scenario. So anyone using Redux? Okay. Anyone using something besides Redux? A couple people? Okay. So that's like the general idea of how I do layouts, but I want to dig into now some of the details. I just want to make sure you guys are ready to move on. You have any questions about anything so far? No? Okay. All right, so let's go back up to the top and let's talk about a few things. Let's see. What do I want to explain first? Let's talk about Redux for a second. And this is not a Redux talk, but I only have two routers. One of them is for this sample project. One of them is logged user state, and the other one is called network error state. I'll explain the network error one later on. So we all follow different strategies when we use React. Some people, when they use Redux, they use it a lot, and all of your application state, like all the state of everything goes into Redux. I follow the pattern of only putting things in Redux if they are necessary from an app-wide standpoint, and otherwise I use local component state first, unless I'm really forced to use Redux. So on questionable, for instance, on my real application, I only have like 5 reducers, and so you're looking at 2 of them right now, and this is like practically a spitting image of one of them, plus besides the fact that I have some more things. So if you are familiar with Redux, there's this really great little tool that helps the boilerplate situation of Redux. It's called Redux Act, and it allows you to make actions like this. And so I'm making a pending action, an authorized action, and an unauthorized action. And basically under the hood, they just keep a little internal like auto incrementing number. So like pending might be like number 1, this one might be number 2, this one might be number 3, and then for network error state, that's like the second reducer that comes in, so this one might be number 4, and this might not be number 5. It's just like an internal unique identifier that they keep track of. And as you know, when you're doing Redux, if you're familiar with Redux, you make these actions and action types, and they're kind of like these fake constant strings and capital letters. That's like kind of like the formula that people are told to use. This tool makes it so that you don't have to do any of that stuff. I don't have to make my action creators and action types and all that kind of stuff. I can't even speak that lingo anymore because I haven't done it in such a long time. I just use this tool. It returns a function. So pending and authorized and unauthorized are functions now. And then down here, this is like what would be your switch statement in Redux or in the reducer. This is the logic that creates the reducer. Create reducer comes from that same tool, see, create reducer. And basically, you can see that it's dynamically creating these properties. That's because, okay, these are function calls, but you see I'm not calling a function. That's because there's probably like a toString or something like that basically kind of effectively turns this into a 1. It's not literally a 1. It's kind of like a string that's like act:1 or something like that. It's kind of like some sort of like little special string, but it's basically based on numbers. And so when I have these exported methods where I say set authorized and I pass in a bunch of authorization details, I can say store dispatch, and then I can call that function. And by calling that function, it's going to call that part of the reducer. So it's actually a really nice, clean little tool. If you don't know anything about Redux, then you're not going to follow really anything of what I just said. Just realize that, or know that this state, which I'm calling initial state, this is basically now data that I have access to everywhere in the application. That's all you need to know. Anyone want to look at this a little longer before I close it out? We can always come back to it, I guess. Okay, so another thing that I do is I got this folder called API, and there's this export. I didn't like calling it index, so I wanted to call it all. So anywhere in the application, you can say import the API from API all, and then you could do things like you can say API users, get user for or whatever, and that'll basically return to you an Axios promise. So I like the fact that I can access my whole API just with one import. So the way I do that is the all is just basically bringing in auth. Auth is these functions right here that are returning promises. Normally they would return like an Axios promise like that, but we're not using real network requests for this example, so I'm kind of returning these like stubbed out promises. So there's a resolved promise, and get logged user is a rejected promise. Yeah, one of the things, by the way, that I didn't really mention in the description is that I'm going to spend half of this talk talking about authentication and how I do that, because that's also something that trips people up, and so that's why we're digging into these things. So I'll explain what get logged user is separately from login. Actually, maybe this is a good time to explain that. So I use JSON Web Tokens on the server. When you use JSON Web Tokens, you can decide to store those however you want in the browser. Typically, people use either cookies or local storage. I actually chose cookies because, and I don't know enough about local storage to know that this isn't also true of local storage. So you might say, oh, you can do that in local storage too, and I would say, cool, I didn't know that. But the reason why I chose cookies is because even though some people like to send their JSON Web Tokens up to the client, and then the client actually has access to the parts of the inner parts of the session, basically, like the user data, like the user ID, for instance. I don't want to do that. There are some security vulnerabilities with that, especially if you get some cross-site scripting going on. So what I do is I set my cookie in Node, because you can set cookies on the back end or on the front end. And I set my cookies in Node, and on the back end I say it's going to be an HTTP only cookie, which means it will be sent to the browser and it will return back to the server, but the browser cannot read it. Like the actual JavaScript that is written cannot read it. So it's kind of like this capsule that cannot be opened or read, which is great for security. However, I don't have access to the user ID in the front end if I do that. So what I do is when you send a login request, I actually return an object. This is kind of a simplified version of it. I return an object that is basically the very basic details of the user being logged in, and then I store it in Redux. So I have access to this stuff without compromising the JSON Web Token, which if it could be opened and exploited, you could set your session ID to be someone else's session ID. I know that it's hard to do that, but it could happen in theory. So, so basically when you log in, I return this that I have highlighted right here, the user information, and then I call this function called setAuthorize, which you can see comes from that logged user state. So setAuthorize is right here, so that's going to call the authorized action. So that's basically going to do this, and now it's inside of Redux. Okay, fair enough. When the person refreshes their screen, all is lost. So I need a way to get that information back, and you'll see in a second where I call get logged user. And that's basically just, it's kind of like login, but without the login part. So it kind of goes to the server, hits a different endpoint, and returns the same information that login would return, just without the login part. Okay? And you can see that I'm doing a promise reject right now, which is why in our little sample project, I don't have like a real login, obviously. So when you click the login button, it just logs you in, and you can go back and forth between things. And when you refresh, it loses everything because of that fake promise rejection. Notice if I were to try to go to questions right now, it sends me back to the login page. So all the mechanics are there for a true login situation, except for the actual network request. Fair enough? You guys like that so far? Okay, let's get into it a little bit more. So I can probably shut that down. That. And that. Okay, so let's see how it works. When you log in, let's go to the auth section here, and we've got this login form. Very, very basic React stuff right now. You would normally do your form strategy here. I just made a button that when clicked, it calls this on submit. And then on submit is going to call the API auth login, which is, returns a stubbed out promise that's resolved. And then I'm basically just going to push you to the actual home page. and the home page has a redirect which sends you into the application. So I like this strategy because if you are logged in and you just happen to visit this website, you just go to the home page of the website and it tosses you into the place you're supposed to be. So I kind of like that strategy. Let's take a look at authorized route. Oh, by the way, notice that I don't really think it's the role of this component which logs you in to like set up Redux. So that's why with my strategy, you just simply call API auth login, and API auth login, if you remember, after returns that resolve promise, it talks to Redux for you. So if I need my network request stuff to talk to Redux, I usually call off to API, whatever. When I get the response back, I usually just talk to Redux inside of here and not in my actual components. You can hate my strategy. I don't know. It's a strategy. It works. All right, so let's finally take a look at this component, this authorized route. All right, so where is that? That is in, oops, it's in utils, authorized route. Okay, so let's take a look at this for a second. First of all, it's using classic Redux stuff right here, where I'm basically making a higher order component around this component, where I'm connecting to Redux. And if you're not familiar with Redux, like I said, basically all this does is it's going to make a logged property for this component up here. And that logged property is equal to the logged property of, let's go back into our state. There's this logged property right here. So that's a 3-value situation. It can either be true or false if you're logged in or not logged in. And it's null if we're like kind of in transition, like we're in pending mode. Okay, so those are the 3 states. So the, where am I doing here? Right here. I gotta close some things. So I keep on. Okay, so you can see here that when this component first loads, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna check to see if we're pending. If we're pending in this situation, that means that we just did a refresh. Because if we just logged in, as you already know, if we just logged in according to my logic, what happens right after you log in? I set up Redux, and in that case, Redux would either show true or false for whether or not you logged in. It wouldn't show null anymore. So if you're on this page and this value is null, you did a refresh, basically. So I'm going to set my get logged user right here to the resolved value of, remember that method we talked about, which simply goes and gets the stuff, goes and gets the logged information. And it just basically resolves a promise because I basically want this to be a promise no matter what so that I can just do a catch at the end. That's all. You could solve this other ways. You do an if statement or whatever, but that's fine. I will talk about my throw network error when we get around to it, but that's what that is. So this is basically going to say, hey, if logged is null, let's go and make logged true or false, because ultimately when we get down here, we need logged to be true or false, because you're either logged in or not. So if you're not logged in, I just basically return a simple little div tag that says log, loading or whatever. And if your logged is equal to false, then I am going to return a redirect to the login page that includes a variable for what page you tried to access. So that way when you do log in, I can take you to that page. That's a pretty common tactic. And then if you are logged in and neither one of those if statements hit, then I'm going to load the component that you asked for. And the reason why, notice that this is lowercase c because props usually are lowercase c for this component. You can see right here that I am basically aliasing that while I'm destructuring it to a capital C. And the reason why you have to do that is because you can't do JSX on components in React unless they're capital letters. That's all. Make sense? Okay. All right, so that probably pretty well explains this whole situation right here, right? All right, so let's talk about, this router thing up here. Remember when I said that router was kind of like my own special router? Basically, there's this weird thing in And I would recommend you comment stuff like this. Like if you have a weird situation and someone was like looking at this, they'd be like, why did he do that? So make a comment link to the article or the GitHub issue that you found that talked about it. Basically, in React Router, if someone types a path with a / at the end, it keeps the /. If they type it without the / it will not have a /. So you might have a /, you might not. That will mess with your strategy to combine like the existing path to a new path because you can't depend on the / being there or not. So I found this solution from someone else and I put it in here. Basically, just always ensures that the route or the path rather will not have a /. Okay, pretty simple. And then I've got this scroll to top, which is just what it sounds like in React Router. If you have a situation where someone clicks, I discovered this when I had an FAQ, because when do we ever make something where you click on something and it actually does like a 1995 anchor, where it actually anchors down to somewhere in the middle of the page? Well, I had an FAQ that I was building, and it was using that, and it wasn't working because when you click on anchors, it doesn't anchor down, so this solves that problem. Also, if the route changes for any reason, you want to probably scroll back up to the top. So imagine I have a pagination situation where I got a bunch of results. At the bottom, there's like the pages that say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You click on page 2, and it just shows you like it shows you the same viewport. So basically, you're looking at the bottom of the results of page 2 instead of scrolling back to the top. So this is a strategy that fixes that. There are some drawbacks to doing this. There are situations when you want the URL to change and not to scroll to the top, but when I saw the documentation for how to do this, you can either do this strategy, which is like a global strategy, like you're always going to scroll to the top anytime the URL changes, or you can do like a per route strategy, and I didn't want to do a per route strategy. That seemed like it was obnoxious. So anyways, that explains those two things. You guys, I'm like opening up my closet here, and I'm just like showing you all my dirty laundry. I mean, how often do you get a chance to see someone else's really bad ideas, right? All right, so this is actually pretty cool. I thought, okay, well, eventually I'm going to need to do like a site down type of strategy. So I commented this out, but you could easily comment this back in. This process.env thing, you're thinking, oh, that's Node. How are you doing that in React? Well, in Create React App, you can make environment variables that actually show up in your browser code as, just like as if they're a node, process.env. I was using Create React App for a little while. I eventually abandoned it and made like my own like boilerplate strategy for like Webpack and Babel and stuff. But I kind of stole a lot of ideas from Create React App and included that one. So, so all I would have to do is have an environment variable called React App site down equal to true, and those come in as strings. That's why it's like that. And just in case you can't see that very well. And, oh, this would have to, okay, never mind. I guess it would have to look like more like that. So basically, if the site is down, you can load a route for, if they go anywhere, that loads your site down page. So I want to keep that in there for you guys, just in case you wanted it. Man, we're cruising right along. There's all kinds of things I still want to show you. You have any questions about anything so far? Yeah? You mean your JSON Web Token?
Yeah.
You can do that. None of this code really depends on it being a part of the cookie. I basically use the values that I get back from being logged in. You know, when you send a login request, I get that JSON back. I use that to determine whether or not you're logged in. And in case you're wondering, like, well, can't that be hacked or whatever? Because it's technically front-end variables. Someone can just go in and turn that logged variable to true or whatever. Every network request that gets like your questions or like your account or anything like that, all of those things are going to return 403s if you're not logged in. And according to my XHR strategy, if 403s come back, I'm sending you the login page anyway, so it's not really worth trying to hack. You're not going to get like someone else's data by trying to hack it. So you could use local storage if you want to save your stuff that way. It doesn't really matter for anything that I'm doing here. It's a good question. Anything else? Any questions? Joe, you got to have like 1,000 comments. Joe always gives me crap about everything I do, so that's why I love him. What did I do wrong?
I don't use React Router, so I can't comment too much.
Okay.
I am curious about your questions route, though. What's your route for questions look like?
Okay, yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more. So, okay, this is actually something that was a hard lesson for me to learn because your layered strategy to your layouts and putting a switch statement inside of each one. At first, it feels like in React Router 4 that each physical like layouts that you have. So if you have like 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers, it feels like each one has to have a different like / name in the URL at first. It almost makes you, it almost like forces you to think that way at first until I realized that I can just do this. I can just simply say, because realize I could have done this, Joe. I could have had like if you go to app, if you go to auth something, go here. If you go to app something, go there. And then it would have been app/questions. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
But I wanted the subdomain to be app. I don't want it to be app.questionable/app. That's stupid, right? So I've got this right here. If we go to authorized layout, realize that the reason why the 4 of these things exist, even though they all look the exact same layout, is because basically I'm saying these are the 4 things you can go to get past this this layer, right? So if we go to authorized layout, notice I'm repeating those things. That's how you get around having the app thing in the forefront. It's just a little bit of repeat. It's not that bad.
So what is?
So then you go to
obviously you have some state in your URL, right? You have to load like what test you're on, or what question, what page of the questions you're on, or whatever.
So you want me to dig in further then? This, I think that's answers your question, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So after notice all of these particular ones all load app sub layouts, but admin loads admin sub layout because that's going to have different tabs, and then account's going to load account sub layout. So now let's dig into app sub layout. Okay, so app sub layout, and by the way, I'm going to answer your question, and then I'm going to talk about this network stuff, because this is that thing that I was like, I want to talk about something else, but what was it? It was this stuff right here. So I'll talk about all this error stuff in a second, but just forget about it for now. Just pretend like none of that exists right there. Okay, so now we're finally at the level where we're basically at this level here, where the blue thing is either going to be about questions or it's going to be about tests. So if you go to tests, I just have this little sub component that I wrote right here, just to put something in there. And then if you go to questions, we're going to go to the question section layout. So even though this folder right here is called layouts, this is kind of like for my general layouts. Once I get a certain level deep, each one of these folders, I do this thing in organizing my React applications where some people like to have like your utility stuff at the top level, and then they have a folder called components, and then anything that's a React component goes in that. And that's just like one more layer of stuff to dig through to get to your components. And so these components, some of them are about like sections of the application, like questions gets into React components. But API is more of a utility, specifically for the API. Utils are higher order components, and utils is a higher order component, so not capitalized at first. So I kind of like do this like mixed bag of stuff where I bring everything up to the top, so it's one less layer of stuff to dig through. Questions right here, so I got this questions section layout. This is going to be the tabs right here. So finally we're somewhere where we actually have like the main tag and the aside, and we've got the H1 that says questions. This right here is the tabs, and then depending on what tab you click, you go into one of these pages. And so that looks like this right here. So bam, bam, those two, see that? So you go to questions, and you're kind of like at this component right here that says browser, or it says browse and tabs. So that looks like this. From here, this is where I would make another folder inside of here called like browse or author or whatever, all the different parts of questions that you can go to, and I would just keep this gravy train going and just keep on going and stuff.
So at some point you have to ask the server for like a specific test, right?
Yeah.
So how do you say like I want to load test ID 1? How do you deal with dynamic properties in your
in React Router. That's not really, yeah, because that's not really like a how I deal with it. That's a React Router way of dealing with it. So let's just, for fun, make like and I'm kind of new to VS Code, so I don't have my snippets yet. So this will be painfully slow for me to type out, I'm sure. So let's say we have a class for browse questions. Okay, so on and so forth, and then I'll have like a okay, so I must have typed something wrong. I don't know. I just haven't used this yet, so it's complaining about it. I'm still getting used to like these colors and stuff. So if yeah, so if I put that right there, okay, there we go. In here, this when the component did mount, you have access to anytime you have a route Joe in React Router 4. It gives you props, like it gives you this match prop. So that comes from this prop. And the match prop has match.params.question ID, which would have come from if there were like, not that this is the right URL here, but I guess in one sense I wrote a component for browsing, but imagine this were like the, I don't know, question profile, right? So looking at the question itself, so question profile. So match, okay, so if I do that, and that, you can do question ID like that.
Okay.
That's how you do it.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. Oh, so since we're kind of talking about this stuff right here, I will give you, I mean, how many undos do I got to do to fix that? Okay. You may notice that there's, and this component, this question section thing, it has match as well because it was also a component loaded from a browse at some point. So there's match.url and there's match.path. You want to make sure you use the right one. Match.path is basically like the previous paths that got us to this point. So in other words, by typing match.path then /tags is virtually the same thing as like if the previous path were like some path with with some dynamic part to it like that. It would literally be like a string like that. Does that make sense? Like match.path is like the regular expression-ish looking string that got us there, whereas match.url would be like that. It would be the actual URL that got us to this point. So you want to make sure you use the right one, because if you use match.url right here, and if there had been a dynamic variable like that foo variable that I had, then that doesn't say :foo anymore. It just says 90, right? Which means the subcomponents that you're loading, it has no idea what the match params foo is because there never was one according to it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so that's why when you're building routes based on previous paths, you always want to use match.path. In this case, I guess I could have done match.path right here, but in this case, it almost doesn't matter because I know that in order to get here, you just simply went to /question. So I know that in that case. But this thing right here is a big gotcha, and I do document that or talk about that in an article that I wrote for CSS Tricks, in case you've read it, which Chris sent out. So that's kind of a big gotcha. And actually, you can see it in my comments right here. I left those in there because those comments are there to tell you exactly what I just told you. If you didn't get anything of what I just said, read that article and it'll detail out that a lot more. So does that explain what you wanted that explained? I think it does.
Yep.
So if we go back up one level to right here. All right, so errors. There's these things called error boundaries in React where you can make a component that's kind of like high up in your tree structure that has a lifecycle method for handling errors, and it basically makes that component like a catch, like a try-catch situation for React. So if you have any errors in React, it'll bubble up to that error boundary component. I decided to implement that error boundary component as a higher order component. So by me saying with error boundary right here, that's wrapping this whole component right here in one of these error boundary components, such that I will get this render error, which is whatever React told me. So render error will be a prop that I get if there's an error. Here's what they don't tell you about error boundaries. Error boundaries only get triggered in the render methods of child components. So if you have like a render method that like returns like 2 nodes, you know how I like return 2 nodes with like a fragment around it? But if I didn't do that, and so I'm doing like a fundamental like JSX problem, that will trigger an error boundary, but your network request or like hard throwing an error in JavaScript will not trigger an error boundary. Okay? So my network requests, imagine if I had a component like that component we were just writing, like one of these components that did some sort of network request and it throws an error. I need a way to handle that. Further, let's say you do decide to handle that. Most people, I think, the way that they handle that is they send you to an error page. That probably makes sense, right? You get a network error, you send this person to an error page. I didn't want to do the strategy where, let's look at the real questionable. Let's look at like a particular question. Oh, okay. So here's a question. I mean, this right here is a component that has it's in charge of its own destiny. It has its own network requests. Same thing with this one. Same thing with the settings. So there's a lot of different network requests that make this page happen. What happens if this tags area has a network error? I don't want to do that thing where I just have like that little section say, this section can't load because there's a network error. I also don't want to send you to a general error page that says, hey, you triggered some sort of error. I like errors that like leave you in context of where you are, so you can see like what page you're on. I mean, how annoying is it to like trigger an error, and you can't go back because it's going to throw you back in the error page. You don't even know what URL you're at to be in the error. So I want to be on this page. I just want everything from the word author question down. I want all of this to be replaced with like a jumbo like notice that says you have an error on this page. That's what I wanted, and because that's what I wanted, that means my error messages need to be in a certain place in my layout structure. So how do I tell this component way down here that throws an error to tell this component that's like kind of mid-drift in this like layers of layout that this component needs to handle the error messaging? I use Redux because with Redux you can communicate between all components. So this, if we go to like, just as an example, we'll go back in here. Nope, back in here. So when I throw, oh, this one doesn't throw anything. I'm trying to find one that throws. I think I know which one we can go to. Where is? Oh yeah, so this one right here. So throw network error. All that's doing is just telling Redux about a network error. That's all it's doing. I don't need to open up that reducer. It's very fine. I'll open up the reducer just because you told me to. It's very simple. It just has a message and a status. Okay? So anywhere in my application, I can say throw network error, and I got this message and the status that comes from the network. And then at the app sublayout, I can get those two things. So I'll get a network error message or a network error status, or actually I should get both of them at the same time, if there's a network error, and I'll get a render error message if one of the error boundaries tosses. So this kind of covers all those grounds. And then basically right here, I'm basically saying, if I get a render error, I'm going to call this function called render error page. If I get an error status for the network, I'm going to call the same function render error page. And then down here, I just have this logic that says, if I don't get any errors at all, then go ahead and start rendering sublayouts. And then this render error page or whatever, I mean, I could have put this in like another place and imported it or whatever, but it's so simple that I basically just check to see what kind of error message you have, and I render a forbidden page or a not found page or a generic error page. So just to kind of show you what that looks like, what if I just do that right there? And of course, if that, I'm taking this variable away so that that one automatically triggers, but I'll also take that away because in reality, it wouldn't trigger that stuff below if this were true. So we'll save this and we'll go up here and we'll take a look. Damn thing. Okay, so I guess get rid of that. What now? Ugh, why does it have to do this kind of shit? Find a reuse stub, match. There's all kinds of stuff.
Just
Okay.
turn those rules off.
What's that?
Just turn those rules off in this file.
That would take as long as doing what I'm about to do anyway. I gotta kill that, but I gotta bring that in, and I gotta kill match. What else did it say? Oh, I gotta kill that right there and that right there, and I think that's it. It looks like it worked. So that's what I want to have happen if I have one of those things. Make sense? All right, now for the undo trick.
So are you saying any piece that falls apart, you would direct to that error message?
Well, that particular message would have been the one for a render error. But a network message, here's the message that I got from the server itself, and status would be the literal, like in my case, the number, is it a 403 or is it a 402, or is it a 401 or 400 or whatever. And then up here, based on if it's a 403 or a 404, I'm rendering these pages, which basically are like, sorry you don't have access to this content. This is the generic one, which you can give a message to, or it can have the oops, we're having an issue, in case you don't give it a message, or sorry, we can't find the content you're looking for. So it's detailed in that sense. This is a lot of stuff. I'm giving you guys a lot of stuff, right? You guys can have this. This is all at just ignore that yellow message. It doesn't mean anything at all. This is at my account, and it's just React nested layout meetup. I based this on my little boilerplate thing that I put together. So if you just want to see and everyone has like a boilerplate, but if you want to see my little boilerplate, I just made this thing called React Starter, and it's basically like just a Webpack and a Babel setup. Besides that, oh, you know what? There is one more thing I wanted to show. I think that covers everything except this last little thing I wanted to show here. So let me see. All right, I'm going to show you my favorite component that I've ever made. Okay, so it's called columns, and let's make sure everything is working. Is everything still working over here? Oh, by the way, that error, because that error is a part of Redux, if you were to change pages, that error is still there, right? Because it's part of Redux. So if we go to the unauthorized layout, oh, it looks like I'm missing it. If someone reminds me, I'll put this back in there. This is supposed to be unauthorized. Oh no, sorry, it's authorized. Oh, there it is. If you change URLs, let's just clear the network state. So that's how we solve that. Okay, so are we good to go? No. What did I do? Don't say it. What? I think I undid this one enough so that it's good. Maybe I have to do this again. So there's this thing called npmplease.com, and it's kind of funny. I use it probably every other day.
You should yarn it. I don't have any of these problems.
Yarn, please. What the hell?
You not save all on dudes?
You know what? I think I did, but
Don't worry, they'll get it fixed as soon as possible.
yeah, I'm just gonna do git checkout. That might fix it. It's gonna have to should trigger a thing, huh? There we go. Okay, so let's go to this like little sub area. My favorite component. So when I do CSS, my strategy is to make it so that when I'm making like new pages, I hope I don't have to write new CSS. Like that's like the ultimate goal is when you're making new UI, you shouldn't have to make a lot of new CSS unless it's something like really special. You should have a good you should have like basically Brad Frost style strategy where you have atoms and you have molecules and you have organisms. That's like his analogy for little tiny CSS utilities that make bigger CSS utilities that make even bigger ones. And if you've got a good strategy, you can do that kind of stuff. So so far, I've been talking about like layout in the macro sense. And if you've seen any of my talks, I usually try to make a very big distinction between this is layout, these are components. My analogy has always been that layout is like a bookshelf. Components are the books on the bookshelf. So components are like these movable parts. But sometimes you need to do something like, oh, perfect, like this down here. So I have a button, and then I've got like another button over here. I didn't have to make any new CSS for those things, but I need to split them apart. Oh, that sucks. What do you do for that? You like got to go in and like make like a little special wrapper and like a flexbox situation, right? So when CSS grids were really popular, people like you'd have like a grid inside of it. Basically, people use CSS grids the way that we used tables back in 2002. It was a one-for-one replacement, like nested tables, nested CSS grid. I never, ever, ever liked CSS grid systems. I always just rolled my own like float strategy, or when it came later, flexbox strategy. But there is one situation where I think having like a basic grid is really nice, and that is, so if this is like my custom strategy, I'm using flexbox, and I've got that going on, and you know, maybe I've got some stuff up here, and I got some stuff up here. Eventually, I'm going to want to split this up into two sections like that. And red appears like the layout strategy, and these are components. But this is like, it's not really the layout, and it's not really components. It's like a component divider, kind of. It's kind of like there's the bookshelf, then there's the books, and then there's like those things that kind of hold the books up in the right spot, right? So I like a micro strategy for those. So I made this thing called columns, and the way it works is like this. Let's go to the questions section here. Instead of this stub for being at questions, I'm going to say questions page, and we're just going to make our own little questions page. By the way, if you're just returning JSX, do parens. Don't do curlies and then a return statement. All right, so we've got ourselves a little div tag here. Oops, I'm in VS Code now. Can I do that? Yeah, look at that. You can't do that in Sublime. All right, so we have, like H1, whatever. Okay, so then I've got a couple buttons. Oops. You know what? I'm actually going to bring in my import button from UI button. Okay, so I've got a couple buttons here. Let's make sure this whole thing runs. Questions? Oh, okay. Yeah, so I just talked about this on Slack the other day. Buttons should look like links sometimes, and links should be able to look like buttons sometimes. The reason is because if it changes the URL, like these change the URL, these are links, okay? So semantically, those need to be anchors with hrefs. They need to change the URL. This right here, this clear selection, that talks to Redux. That is a button with no styles. It should not be an anchor with some sort of like JavaScript void thing going on like the old days. So sometimes you need something that looks like a link, but it's actually a button for mechanic reasons and vice versa. So anyway, my button is stripped of all design until class, until it has a class name of button. And then I can give anchors class names of button, and they look exactly like these buttons that have a class name button. So that's my strategy, and it's a good strategy. You should do that too. So we go to questions. All right, so we got our two buttons here, but we need to split them up. We need to put one on one side and one on the other side, and you know what? We're also going to have an anchor, just for fun. Actually, let's just do a button and an anchor. So this will be like this, and this is like our cancel button or something like that. All right, so I want to split those up. So I have this thing. If we import columns and column from layout. I really don't like this gray thing that it's doing. It's supposed to be a part of like my theme because it wasn't doing that a couple of days ago. So if I do columns and then column like that, that literally sets up just a basic flexbox situation where columns is a flex container and the individual column components are flex, especially, well, they're flex items. So what do flex items do? Trivia. What do flex items do if you don't say flex one or anything like that? They don't expand. If you had a container like this and you said display flex and you had two div tags that by virtue of their parent containers being a flex container, your two div tags would go like this and they would be as wide as their content, as if they were inline elements. Until you say flex, and in this case, you just have to say flex. So if I say flex, flex, that's like saying flex one, flex one. And if I put these up here, save that, realize, you know what, how about we do this? I'm going to go to that utility for authorized route, and I'm just going to turn that off by going like that. Now we don't have to, oh, damn it. All right, whatever. ESLint is great, right? All right, so that's what you would expect from a flexbox situation. You've got one div right there and another div right there. The reason why the cancel is where it is because it's left aligned, and the flex item is taking up half the space. So what you can do is, with my component that I wrote, shut this down. You can say flex flex if you want. I don't usually need to do that. But you can say, you can get rid of those, and you can say split. And we're going to have to do this every time. Okay, so now they're split. And now, as you add more stuff to the right-hand side, it will approach the center because it's split. It's still using flex, it's just using that gap between thing. You can do this. By the way, if they were flex flex and they're touching each other, you might want a gutter. So I also have, you can say gutter. So if we did that and save it, notice that neither one of these are flex, and so we would get a situation. Oh, where's the gutter? It's not there. That's weird. Maybe they have to be flex items to get the gutter. But, or is it gutters? There you go, it's gutters. Now there's gutters right there. If you want those things to be like centered, someone already criticized me for this. They said I should use middle. I used center. Very nice. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do. You can say, like, if you wanted to have, like, this situation right here, you want this to be 200 pixels wide, and this to take up the remaining space. The way you would do that is actually, you probably shouldn't express things in pixels. M's are much better. So if you say size equals, and then you pass in a number like that, that's 4M's, or 5M's, or 6M's. Okay? So those are expressed in M's if you use size. So I can say size 4 flex, and that would create like that kind of situation right there. I don't have this documented or in NPM, but I want to do that soon. Does anyone like want me to do that so you can use it? Yeah? Okay, so I'll make it a priority to get that done next week. Anyways, it's a pretty cool little component. Maybe I'll make it so you can use middle or center. You know, kind of like color, like if you're English or whatever. So by the way, if I were gonna do like a button and just have the word cancel like right next to it, this is like a lot just for that. So I also have some other little utilities, like if you do a div tag with a class of, well, let me show you this first. You guys know what lobotomized owl is? Raise your hand if you honestly don't know what lobotomized owl is. Okay, you guys are all JavaScript people. Did you go to CSS Day? All right, so lobotomized owl is a CSS selector. It basically looks like this. So if you have a container, so imagine like a div tag container, and if you say that as a selector, that's lobotomized owl because it looks like two owl eyes with like a nose in the middle. The guy who coined it's kind of sarcastic. But basically what this is saying, read it from right to left because that's how selectors work. Anything that has a sibling right next to it before it, and that sibling right before it is a direct child of container. Then what you say is margin top of 1M or something right here. The whole point of lobotomized owl is basically it's a fancy selector that selects everything except for the first child. So you know that situation you're in where you have like a column and you've got some components in here like this, and you need to create a gap between those two components? The worst thing you could do in CSS is go to this component and give it a margin top. In fact, my CSS, my components, and this doesn't matter if you're using a CSS and JavaScript strategy at all. When you make a component, all components have some sort of like outer shell to them, some sort of like wrapping div or something. Never put exterior margin on it, ever. Because if you have exterior margin on this component, you basically did that in a situation where you're basically saying this component in this situation needs to have space between itself and other components. You've just made that component not a component. You know why? Because the definition of a component is something that's reusable, and if you use that somewhere else, you have what I call margin baggage that comes along with it, and now you have to do what? Negate it for that other special section, right? You understand what I'm saying, right? So lobotomized owl is a selector that you don't do on the component itself, you do it on the container, right? Container. But if that selector says select everything except for the first child, so it's not selecting that one, but it is selecting that one, and that one, and that one. So if you say that selector that I have right there, margin top 1M, you're selecting these components, but not in a direct way, you're selecting them in an indirect way. And so you're basically going to get spacing in between all these components, but that component can live somewhere else without margin baggage. That's what the lobotomized owl is. If you want to learn more about it, I have a video on it on YouTube. Okay, so I decided to make a little selector called owl, and it does that. I mean, it does lobotomize owl. So you look through CSS, or you look through questionable DOM, and you will see little owls all over the place. It's kind of funny. But sometimes you need, like in this case, what if you need like that situation where you have things on a horizontal level, and all of them, except for the first one, needs left margin. You can use the same thing. You can use lobotomized owl. It's just that instead of margin top, it's margin left. So guess what? I've got a utility class called horizontal owl. And you know what? Between owl, horizontal owl, and my columns thing, doing layout is so nice. I have all my components, and I can just compose little like layout situations with those things, and it's really, really nice. So if I was doing a situation where I just wanted like, let's go to Questionable real quick, and let's see if I can find a light box. Okay, so this is probably using okay, this is probably using, I'm looking at the footer right now. The footer is probably using the columns thing to split up the left-hand side from the right-hand side and not cancel. But between these two buttons right here, that little gap, I don't have like a nested column situation. That would be ridiculous. I just have a little wrapper called horizontal outer. In fact, you could probably get away with my columns thing, you can get away with doing this where you can say columns, column. I didn't spell that right. That's okay. I mean, if you add a class name, because obviously columns can make a real div tag. If you add a class name, I just pass that class name down, so I can do that right there. It's really nice to be able to do that kind of stuff. So I have all this CSS for you. I'm kind of a CSS guy, so let's face it, it's probably better than your CSS. However, none of you can use it. You want to know why? So you're all doing CSS and JavaScript. That's just me showing you guys. Of course, it's not better than your CSS. Of course, you can refactor it to whatever you want to do. That's pretty much my talk. Unless you have any other questions. I got a bunch of stickers up here that say, I'm a questionable developer. So if you want those, grab those. That's it. Thanks, everyone.